Fighter EX plus Alpha.
Final round. Fight!
Greetings my dear audience, it's that time of the week again where I share all my ongoing obsessions and interests with what I hope are a bunch of like-minded people. Nerd! In today's episode I will be showcasing a series of games which in my humble opinion are rare gems which sparkle bright in an ocean of fighting game franchises which have come to dominate gaming culture. And while two of these titles already belong to the massive brand that is Capcom's Street Fighter, the extra characters that exist within them have never been seen in any other Street Fighter installment outside of the EX series, instead resurfacing only in 2018 as part of a new fighting game franchise. I sure as hell hope so, since there's only been one installment so far, at least internationally. The games in question are Street Fighter EX Plus Alpha, Street Fighter EX2 Plus, and Fighting EX Layer. The reason I have chosen to display all three of them is because there is a particular character I would like to focus on, who not only happens to be my favorite of the entire roster for all three games, but also matches today's topic quite nicely. The character I am referring to is the iconic Skullomania, who I would argue is probably the most famous of the roster since he is so easily recognizable, outside of the already established Street Fighter characters. The original Street Fighter EX series was released on both consoles and arcade systems between the years 1996 and 2000. Unlike all the other Street Fighter games, the EX series wasn't developed by Capcom, but was instead created by a different company called Arika, which was made up of former employees from Capcom who had worked on some of the previous Street Fighter games as well. Capcom would however go on to publish the Street Fighter EX games under their own brand, since they contain majority of their licensed characters. However, Arika would also add a handful of new characters like the aforementioned Skullomania, which they would retain the rights to in the coming years. Hence why these unique characters were never featured in another Street Fighter game since Street Fighter EX3, which was released for the Sony PlayStation 2 in the year 2000. While still maintaining the rights over these characters, Arika would not feature them in another fighting game aside from the extremely obscure Fighting Layer game published by Namco in 1998, exclusively in Japan for arcade cabinets, and only ever bringing them back again in 2018 for Fighting EX Layer, which is a spiritual successor to the Street Fighter EX games, and which surprisingly also started off as an April Fool's joke, but thanks to quickly gaining immense popularity online, Arika decided to make it into a full-fledged game. Sadly, it still gets overshadowed by the bigger franchises like Tekken, King of Fighters, Mortal Kombat, and Street Fighter, but I for one sure as hell hope they will be making another Fighting EX Layer game eventually. Anyway, today's topic will be delving super deep into a relatively obscure nerd subculture which mostly exists in Japan, but has a steady growing fan base in other parts of the world as well. I am of course referring to Power Rangers. Or rather, more about the genre that Power Rangers and similar shows like it call home. How many of you were even aware that Power Rangers actually belongs to a specific genre of Japanese media? And even more so, as I proceed to utterly annihilate everyone's childhood, how many of you were aware that Power Rangers wasn't even an original idea to begin with?
It's false. No way. Not this time. Not this time. No, not this time. It's totally made up. Pure fiction. It's fiction. It's fiction. It's a total fabrication. It never happened.
Let me elaborate. You see, Power Rangers is actually based on, or rather a revamped and Americanized version of a Japanese TV show from the 1980s called Super Sentai. Or in Japanese, Super Sentai Shirizu. You see, in the 1970s, a partnership was formed between American-based Marvel Comics and Japanese entertainment powerhouse Toei Company, wherein they would take each other's flagship IPs or intellectual properties and adapt them for their audiences from either country. Marvel would attempt to adapt the various Sentai shows for an American audience that were the brainchild of Toei, and Toei in turn would attempt to adapt Marvel's superheroes for a Japanese audience, which is how we ended up with this masterpiece. Arguably the greatest Spider-Man version that has ever existed. I will fight anyone in the comments on that. I mean, he even has a giant mecha.
Change the apart. Kimi wa naze, kimi wa naze, tatakai tsuzukeru no ka, inochi o kakete, hitosuji ni, muteki no otoko.
Think of this as some sort of international corporate cultural exchange. Unfortunately, though, despite Toei being able to adapt Spider-Man for a Japanese audience by basically making him into a Henshin hero, I will explain what that term means later on, Marvel and Stan Lee were unable to sell American TV networks on the idea of adapting Japanese Sentai shows like Sun Vulcan for American audiences. However, in the 1980s, American-Israeli businessman Haim Saban, who seemingly fits into the stereotype really well if you look up all his business ventures and investments, traveled to Japan where he would end up being exposed to the cheesy awesomeness that are Henshin Heroes or Sentai shows while watching TV in his Japanese hotel room. The show that caught his interest first was titled Chodenshi Bioman. He was so taken by this idea of a team of masked heroes in spandex suits fighting monsters that in 1985 he produced an Americanized pilot for Bioman, which sadly was rejected multiple times by the various TV networks he attempted to sell the idea to. It would only be in 1992 when he would successfully pitch a pilot for an Americanized version of Super Sentai to Fox Kids, which would end up being renamed as the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. For its first couple of seasons, Power Rangers would mostly feature spliced together scenes from the Japanese show Super Sentai, specifically the action and giant robot versus monster battle scenes, which were then cleverly edited alongside scenes that featured American actors as each Power Ranger, Another fun fact is that in the original Super Sentai, the Yellow Ranger was played by a guy, and apparently in the early spliced in action scenes, one can see his bulge in all its glory through the spandex tights and a lack of chest anatomy, if you know what I mean. Also, I do kind of find it a bit funny that in the American version the Yellow Ranger was played by an Asian woman, the Black Ranger was played by a black dude, and the White Ranger being played by a white guy. I'm not sure if this was done on purpose or just an honest mistake. But okay, yeah, I know my sense of humor is messed up, but surely you could tell by now with all the previous videos I put up on YouTube so far.
I apologize for nothing.
But moving onwards and upwards, now that I have destroyed everyone's childhood memories with the real truth behind the Power Rangers, let's draw our attention to the term that I had used earlier, Henshin Heroes. Oh wise 8-bit academic who is knowledgeable about all the ways of the world. What exactly is a Henshin Hero, I hear all of you ask? Well, stay tuned, because that is what I would like to discuss next, and also how exactly our featured video game character Skullomania fits into this whole subject. Essentially, the word Henshin in Japanese means to transform, so in a nutshell, a Henshin hero is a transforming hero.
You don't say!
And for every Henshin hero, there are of course Henshin villains as well. The Henshin hero or villain archetype is simply a heroic or villainous character that are only able to access superhuman powers and abilities once they have transformed into their hero or villain state. Unlike the American superheroes from Marvel and DC, as well as other lesser known comic franchises where most of the heroes retain their powers even when not in costume. A Henshin hero can strictly only access these abilities once they have transformed, which involves their costume magically appearing on their body as well. Talk about efficiency. Who needs to go to the nearest locker room or public bathroom when you can just Harry Potter your suit into existence? Think of it as a Super Saiyan power-up, except that now Goku gets to wear a sleek spandex outfit which hugs his balls ever so tightly, and instead of screaming for 5 episodes until his hair changes color, he first has to perform a silly Ginyu Force style dance and whip out a gadget of some kind and literally yell Henshin, or transform to gain the sexy spandex suit with rainbow colors and all of his superpowers.
My name is Jalen, and I am a Super Saiyan.
I hope that explanation makes sense. But if it didn't, well, I guess I cannot help you then. Go do your own research. Many of us living outside of Japan are quite familiar with a lot of their media. Things like anime, JRPG video games, samurai and ninja films, and even music genres like J-pop and J-rock seem to have gained global recognition and admiration over the years, mostly thanks to how popular anime has become.
極めて不愉快ですよね。そんなに気持ち悪いものをやりたいなら勝手にやってればいいだけで、極めて何か生命に対する侮辱を感じます。
But believe it or not, even the Henshin Hero genre, with all its sub-genres, have also become quite popular outside of Japan. But one has to wonder, where did the concept of the masked transforming hero come from, and just how far back does its origin story go? As far as I can tell, Henshin Hero shows evolved alongside the Tokusatsu genre of films in Japan. Tokusatsu simply being a term to describe films or TV shows that rely heavily on special effects and visual effects, but that aren't full-fledged animation. So think of something like your Marvel Cinematic Universe films. However, I'm not too sure if CGI is included in the definition of Tokusatsu, or if it specifically refers only to practical effects. So maybe a few better examples would be something like the original Jurassic Park movie, the first Terminator film, or if anyone is familiar, the original Japanese Godzilla films, which had their first start in 1954, as well as all the kaiju or giant monster films that were inspired by it. So since Tokusatsu refers to films or shows that include heavy use of special effects, naturally the Henshin Heroes shows would fall under the same category, due to also relying heavily on special effects. Please note however that I am referring mainly to the live action Henshin Heroes shows, and not the anime ones, but I am aware that the trope also exists within anime, and even outside of Japan, if one has to apply the term henshin more broadly to superhero characters around the world that are able to transform. But don't worry, I will cover this in a bit more detail later on. So according to ChatGPT, the very first live action character that could be considered to fit snugly into the trope of the Henshin hero would be the protagonist of the Super Giants films that were released between 1957 and 1959, or in Japanese, Super Giantsu. Despite the plural nature of its title, Super Giants only featured one protagonist who also wasn't a giant. But the hero featured in the show clearly took a lot of inspiration from America's Man of Steel, or Superman as we all know him. From Super Giants, we would get other shows like Moonlight Mask or Gecko Kamen, which appeared in films around the same time, as well as Seven Color Mask or Nanairo Kamen, and lastly Planet Prince or Yusei Oji, which were also released in the late 1950s. These Japanese superhero shows from the late 50s would serve as the foundation upon which all other Japanese superhero shows would be built, and would eventually see the rise of the Henshin or transforming hero in the 1960s and 1970s. To avoid the video being too long, I will jump ahead to some of the more popular Henshin heroes that would become extremely famous in the late 1960s and 1970s, which saw a massive boom in popularity of these types of superhero shows. Two of the most famous examples I can think of are of course Kamen Rider, or the Masked Rider in English, and Ultraman. Ultraman actually had its start way back in 1966 with the Japanese television series Ultra Q, which was produced by Tsuburaya Productions and was intended to be a tokusatsu sci-fi show similar to The Twilight Zone, Outer Limits, or the 90s X-Files TV show that featured kaiju or giant monsters similar to the likes of Gamera, Godzilla, Mothra, and King Ghidorah. After it became a massive hit, the creator Eiji Tsuburaya and his team decided to expand on the franchise by developing a tokusatsu show which would combine elements from the kaiju genre with those of the Henshin Heroes genre, creating an entirely new superhero subgenre called the Kyodai Hero, and thus Ultraman was born and would begin airing on Japanese TV networks later in that same year of 1966. What separated Ultraman from other Henshin heroes at the time was that the beings known as the Ultras, aside from having the typical transformation to grant them their powers, would also have the added ability of being able to increase their size to match the various giant monsters or kaiju they would frequently face off against throughout the original show's initial run, as well as the various sequels, adaptations, and multimedia content that would follow thereafter. Ultraman is to this day one of the most popular Japanese franchises to exist and has also grown a massive following even outside of Asia, only being somewhat rivaled by yet another popular Henshin Hero franchise that started in 1971 known as Kamen Rider or the Masked Rider. Just like Ultraman, Kamen Rider and all its sequels also have a massive following both in and outside of Japan, which consists of tokusatsu shows and films, video games, anime, manga, action figures, and entire YouTube channels and online forums dedicated to its lore and history. Kamen Rider was initially created by Japanese manga artist Shotaro Ishimori at the bequest of Toei producer Toru Hirayama, who hired Ishimori to do character designs for what he intended to be a masked hero project in the year 1970. Kamen Rider proved to be a massive success and would go on to spawn many sequels such as Kamen Rider Amazon in 1974, Kamen Rider Black in 1987, Kamen Rider Blade in 2004, and Kamen Rider Ghost in 2015, just to mention a few, with the most recent one being Kamen Rider Guyver from the year 2024. In total, however, there are about 40 different Kamen Rider shows, and I sure as hell wasn't going to mention every single one of them or this video wouldn't end. Just like the previously mentioned Super Sentai, Kamen Rider Black RX, not to be confused with Kamen Rider Black, would also get a remixed American version in the year 1988, headed by the same guy that would go on to produce the Power Rangers show, Haim Saban. The overall premise of the Kamen Rider universe is that it usually revolves around either one or more masked heroes that ride on motorcycles and whose outfits usually depict insect-like designs as they fight against supervillains called Kaijin, who are hell-bent on world domination. And just like all Henshin Hero shows, the main characters are only able to access their powers and superhuman abilities once they fondle a strange-looking device and shout "Henshin!", after which they would transform into their spandex-clad outfits to kick some evil bad guy ass. Since I already covered Super Sentai earlier, I would like to briefly mention my favorite of all the Henshin Heroes, who I do plan on making a more detailed video of in the future, and that would be Guyver, or as he is known in Japan as Kyoshoku Soku Gaiba. which roughly translates to the Biobooster armor Guyver, which had its start in the early 1980s as a dark sci-fi manga illustrated and written by Yoshiki Takaya, who decided to do something different with his life since he was tired of drawing hentai all the time and probably became too desensitized by the constant illustrating of tentacle stuff. While not a traditional Henshin hero in the likes of Kamen Rider, Guyver does feature a protagonist who is only able to gain superhuman abilities after calling upon what is referred to in the show as the Guyver unit. The main difference being that, unlike Kamen Rider, the Guyver unit isn't a gadget that the hero carries around with them, but rather a parasitic alien bio-armor which upon being released from its casing will quite painfully and traumatically bond with its potential host, which is usually the nearest living organism, after which it will form a symbiotic relationship with the host forever, or at least until the armor itself is destroyed by forcefully removing its control metal, which is the centerpiece in the Guyver's forehead. When this happens, the armor parasite will completely fail and begin to consume its host alive, resulting in both it and its host's deaths. My first exposure to Guyver was through the live-action American adaptation from 1995 called Guyver the Dark Hero, starring David Hayter, the same guy that voiced Solid Snake in the Metal Gear Solid games. I was about 12 years old when I watched it on a video cassette tape in the early 2000s, which one of my uncles gave me. Yes, I know DVD had already existed by then, but my parents were quite old-fashioned. This was also one of my first exposures to on-screen violence as a kid, and at the time, it really traumatized me. It could probably also be where I started to gain my dark sense of humor from. Rewatching it again as an adult, I actually find it very entertaining. Quite cheesy since it was a 90s action film, but the fight scenes and practical effects were pretty awesome for the time. Think of it as basically a version of Power Rangers that is on steroids. It was only later on in early college that I found out it was based on a manga and a handful of anime adaptations as well. And as I usually do when I become obsessed with something, I proceeded to watch and read everything. What more can I say other than that I'm a huge fan of Guyver, and I really wish it would make some sort of a comeback, since it has already been 2 decades since the last anime, which aired way back in 2006.
Mega Smashers! No!
Anyway, to get back on topic, as one can see, the Henshin Heroes genre has grown to become quite the international sensation since its early days in the late 1950s and 1960s. There are so many other Henshin Hero shows that one could discuss outside of those I have mentioned here, and the term Henshin Hero has also come to describe non-Japanese superheroes or villains that gain superhuman abilities once they transform into their alter ego, such as the Hulk, Human Torch, Venom, Iron Man when he uses his nanotech suit, Ben 10, Ghost Rider, and so many more. Even within anime, the Henshin hero trope is quite common. Shows like Yu-Gi-Oh!, Sailor Moon, Beautiful Joe, and Devilman could all technically be considered to contain elements of the Henshin trope, since once again, they all feature characters that require a transformation of some kind to unlock their superhuman abilities and powers. Lastly, this leaves us with the featured character of today's video game showcase, Skullomania, and my reason for featuring him in today's topic instead of that shitty PS1 Power Rangers game. And that is simply because Skullomania, as well as his arch-nemesis Shadow Geist in the StreetFighter EX games, were both heavily inspired by Henshin characters like Kamen Rider, and in the case of Shadow Geist, who was inspired by Henshin villains from the various Kamen Rider series like Shadow Moon and Apollo Geist. While in the lore for the StreetFighter EX games, neither of them actually transform, but instead put on a suit and adopt an alter ego with a widely different personality from their regular ones. I found them fitting to include in today's video because they so greatly pay homage to the genre of Japanese media that inspired them. One can simply look at their suit designs, character animations and expressions, their special moves and ultra combos to see hints of Kamen Rider characters and the many other Henshin Heroes shows that have come to dominate Japanese pop culture to this day. Another honorable mention I would like to present is the 1995 live-action Tokusatsu movie called Mechanical Violator Hakaider, which, yeah, that title is pretty questionable. But anyway, it's absolutely not about mechanical anal violations. What? Hakaider's first appearance was actually as a villain in the original Android Kikaider series, also created by the mastermind behind Kamen Rider, Shotaro Ishinomori. In the Mechanical Violator movie, he is rather presented as an anti-hero who mechanically violates the forces of a brutal dictatorship that seeks to gain more control in a post-apocalyptic wasteland by kidnapping and forcefully brainwashing its inhabitants by a torturous mind control experiment and lobotomizing them. The full movie happens to be available on YouTube for anyone interested. Another favorite of mine, which isn't exactly fully considered a henshin hero, despite the fact that she henshins quite a few times in both movies and the anime prequel, would be the female protagonist from the Zyuranger Tokusatsu films of the early 90s. A space bounty hunter named Iria who has to face off against an almost unkillable alien monster that shares the same name as the title of both movies, called Zyuranger. As mentioned earlier, the films also received a 6-episode anime adaptation in 1994, and while not a traditional henshin hero in the same vein as Super Sentai, Bioman, Ultraman and Kamen Rider, I would argue that she does fit, albeit loosely, within the genre. The main difference being that she isn't exactly a superhero, but a bounty hunter, and is still able to use her martial arts skills and superhuman abilities even without her battlesuit. If you're into cheesy 90s sci-fi action movies, I highly recommend these, as well as the anime. Not to mention the actress Yuko Moriyama that plays the badass bounty hunting babe Iria is pretty hot. But if you're looking for something more in the manga department, you could check out 1996's Exo Skull Zero, which was written and illustrated by Takayuki Yamaguchi. Or you could also check out Opossums, which was created by Tsutomu Nihei, the same guy that brought us the dark cyberpunk manga masterpiece Blam. Opossums is basically a mix of the same megastructure madness that features so prominently in all of Nihei's work, combined with the Henshin Hero awesomeness that was made famous by all the various types of media I have mentioned in this video. In fact, I would argue that the main character Ethero's battle armor is also definitely inspired by the various Kamen Rider shows. Anyway, that's it for today's video. Once again, thank you for tuning into this week's episode of the 8-Bit Academic. For all the views, likes, comments and shares, and for those who have already subscribed as well, thank you. May you all have a great week ahead, and I'll see you all in the next one.
Micro.